All right, we're back with another episode of YoFM, Pursuing Ancestral Medicine. I'm your co-host, Vanessa Nina Tapia, and I have here with you...
Good to see you all today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here today. We're very excited, right, Cesar? Because we have a very special guest, someone who I've known for, I want to say maybe 12 years now. It's been over a decade, that's for sure. Known her for a long time, and someone who I trust and consider a confidant and friend. And so, Tamika, would you like to introduce yourself first? Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, who you are, maybe something many people don't know about you. So something, that you're comfortable sharing.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so excited about this new podcast and what the two of you are doing. So I am Tamika Jackson. I am originally from New Jersey. I say that with East Coast pride. I've been in California for, I guess, about 12 years. So it's the longest I've lived anywhere outside of where I grew up. So California definitely has become a home for me. I identify as a daughter, first and foremost. That is a role that is really dear to my heart. I was blessed to have two parents who loved me, one parent is still living, but loved me unconditionally, have contributed so much to who I've become. And so I am forever grateful. And I try to do my best to pay forward all that they gave to me. I'm also a mother of a very spirited 8-year-old daughter, Kayla, and I am married to my high school sweetheart. So my role as daughter, wife, and mom are three of the most special roles in my life. As far as what I do for a living, I'm a psychologist, but I just like to say I hold space for people to be seen, to grow, to connect to the deepest parts of themselves so that they can live honestly and authentically. So that's what I do. I listen to people tell stories and I help people make sure that their life is in alignment. And work for me doesn't feel like work. It feels like a calling. It feels like just a service, an extension of just who I am and how I move through the world. So I feel really blessed to be in a career that affords me that. As far as something people don't know about me, I'm very competitive. I feel like in my work life, I stay very even, very steady, try to have a very peaceful disposition, but I am competitive. So bring it on, whether it's a board game, whether it's a race, I definitely have a competitive spirit to me.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. So it's good.
Yes.
So the way I met you was actually when I was in school. I was in graduate school and I was needing someone to talk to. But before I got to you, I got to say, I went through, I think, 6 different counselors, 6 different therapists, and I just kept looking and looking and looking. And then I finally went to you, and I was just so impressed and so thankful that I found someone, again, that I could share my story with, that I felt could be a witness, that was trustworthy. And so I know for me, when I tell people that I see a therapist, not everybody, that's very unusual to talk about. There's a lot of stigma around seeking mental health help. And so, especially being Native, being a woman of color, I'm wondering if you can describe some of the obstacles that Black, Indigenous people of color have when it comes to seeking help, because there aren't a lot of, or at least in my view, there aren't a lot of people of color therapists to begin with to go to. So how does that work out when you're doing your work and your outreach, and when people come to you? Do you notice that? They had a journey before they can get to you, huh?
Absolutely. And I think so much of the journey, one, is just being able to break through the stigma that's associated with seeking counseling in communities of color, right? And I think there's a healthy reason for that. I think that we have been over-pathologized, we have been abused in systems. So there's a level of distrust that to me is very much informed by real experiences. There's no paranoia connected to that. And so that gets passed down generationally, right? That we have to keep the stories within our family, that we don't want to be perceived as crazy. So there's a lot of just breaking through stigma within the group, and then when you finally are able to break through and you say, okay, you know what, I think that this is a healthy practice I want to lean into. Maybe I know some people that have sought counseling from my group. When you try to find a counselor, I think you said it's a journey. It really is a journey, and it can be an arduous one. I think I read something that of the mental health providers, maybe 12 to 14% are persons of color. And then when you're trying to find someone specific to your group, so in my case, I identify as a Black woman, and we make up 3% of psychologists in the nation. So it becomes that much harder to find somebody who looks like you, who can potentially understand a lot of the complexities of your experience, a lot of your intersections of your identity. It becomes really, really challenging. And not to say that there's anything wrong with seeking help from someone outside of your group, but it becomes really important to make sure that that person is culturally competent, that person isn't going to rely on you to be the teacher for them, that they're doing their own work. I think that we've made a lot of progress just in the years that I've been practicing, where there are a lot of directories that are specific for certain groups. So if you represent as a person that's queer identified or wanting a Latinx therapist, there are directories specifically targeting those groups. So I think that it's a big improvement that I've seen, but there's still a huge gap in terms of how many of us are out there able to serve the needs that are in abundance right now.
Another thing I'm wondering too is for folks who have not gone to a therapist, not gone to a counselor, haven't spoken to anyone maybe, but are considering it, what do you think they could expect, or at least what are some things that you would tell them that would be helpful in that first experience? Because it can be scary. It can be scary opening up to someone. So for those that are hesitant, but that are wanting to talk to someone, that are needing to talk to someone, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I would want to normalize the desire to seek help, right? I think that oftentimes the asking itself gets pathologized, that there's something wrong with me, I have a disorder. And so I really want to let people know that we are here for one another, right? We are of one spirit is my belief. None of us are meant to function alone, to function on an island. I see a therapist myself. So I want to really normalize it, to just say it's just a matter of getting somebody that's neutral, right? To be able to provide a sacred space for you to go within, for you to be able to block out some of the noise, some of the distraction, and really begin to survey your inner landscape, right? That there's just something so healthy about it, and that the bottom doesn't have to be falling out for you to seek therapy. I think a lot of times we feel like, well, it's not that bad. I don't need to go yet. It's not that bad, right? Or we have this perception that I have to be to the point of contemplating suicide to actually seek help, when it feels like something's a little bit off, or I just feel like I want to do a little bit more, I just want to get a little bit more understanding of who I am, right? That can be enough to say, you know what, let me reach out to someone. So that would be the first step, is just to normalize the ask. And then once, they got the courage to ask, I would say it's really important to pay attention to the dynamic between the two of you. You could have someone that's got all the training in the world, gone to the best schools, but it may not be a good fit for you, right? So I tell people it's really important to pay attention to, how does my spirit feel when I'm with this person, right? This person may be the expert in psychology, but they're not the expert in you, right? You have to pay attention to, is my spirit feeling safe with this person? Is my spirit feeling a sense of authenticity from this person, right? So I would say pay attention to that. Read how this person talks about themselves, right? When you go to the person's website, what language are they using? Oftentimes that's going to give you a cue as to whether or not this person is culturally competent or not, right? What images do they have on their website? So paying attention to, before you even meet them, what is the feel that I'm getting from this person? I also tell people, interview your therapist beforehand, right? Just like you would if you were hiring a sitter for your child, right? You are going to make sure that this is the best fit. If you're hiring anybody for some type of work, a service, you want to make sure that this is the right fit. So some of the questions that you would want to ask this person, I think it's okay to say to them, what's your racial, ethnic, cultural background? Right? You don't want to make any assumption. And if people have a reaction to the question, that's information. How does your cultural background impact your work? What experience do you have when working with fill in the blank population, right? Have you worked with clients who've experienced racial trauma, racial discrimination, right? Are these things that come up in your work? What does it mean for you to provide culturally competent care? These are questions that are really important to ask right up front so that you don't get into a situation where sometimes you assume that people would know these things, but it's not true. A lot of times this stuff is not reflected in the curriculums that we're studying, right? A lot of times people are using a one-size-fits-all approach to counseling. So I think it's really important to empower yourself to ask these questions. Also, word of mouth, asking folks in the community, hey, have you heard of someone that's doing, I want to see a counselor. Can you give me any recommendations? To me, that's always a good route to go rather than just sort of taking a shot in the dark.
Well, first of all, Dr. Jackson, I wanted to thank you for sharing that information with us. I think it's very important, especially for people who haven't perhaps found the needed therapist or the needed person to speak to in times of difficulty. These are questions that are very important. They really put me to think. Next time I'm talking to a counselor or a person I'm seeking help with, these are questions I'm definitely going to whip out and ask them. But yeah, I do have one question, Dr. Jackson. From my previous experiences with psychologists and counselors and people I had the opportunity of spoken with, they usually share with me, that they either came from a troubling background, they had a broken home. But one thing that really caught my attention at the beginning, you mentioned your role as a daughter and how the love your parents gave you really forged you into the person you are today. So my question is, what led you down this path to service, Dr. Jackson? Because it seems that you're someone who's very culturally aware and you're very present with your role, both as a family person, as daughter, wife, and mother. So what led you down this path, which is essentially a path of service?
Yeah. Sessa, I come from a family of helping professionals. So I come from ministers, teachers, social workers, community activists. My immediate family is 4 people, but there were always an abundance of people at our home, for holidays or after church gatherings. My family has always had service as just part of our heartbeat. It's just, so I knew that whatever I was going to do, it was going to have to be something that was going to be emotionally filling, that was going to be providing a service, that was going to be making a positive difference in the life of people. Work for me was never simply going to be about the money or just a means to an end. So I didn't know exactly what shape that would take, but I knew that my work had to be directly touching the lives of people because it's what I experienced. And I saw the fulfillment, the love, the joy that brought into my home. So when I started as a psychology major and then I switched, it felt like it was too challenging. I switched to communications and was having a lot of fun in college, and I finished and started working for a nonprofit where we helped to get primarily Black and Brown students, so from inner city communities, we helped to place them into boarding schools, elite boarding schools. So it was a great program in terms of helping to open doors academically. But a lot of these environments that we were placing the students in were really triggering, really traumatizing, because these weren't places that were used to having people that were of different ethnic background, different socioeconomic status. So I found myself doing a lot of informal counseling with the families, with the youth. A lot of the youth would even say, I feel like I don't have a sense of home anymore. I don't feel at home in this particular boarding school environment. And then when I go back to my home community, I'm not fitting in. I'm being accused of talking white, acting white, thinking I'm better. So it was just creating a lot of uneasiness, which would lead to depression, anxiety, which would lead to people dropping out or even questioning if life was worth living. There was a lot of pain that I found myself holding. And I didn't feel that I was necessarily equipped with the tools to provide. I mean, I could provide a listening ear, but I knew I needed some more training. And so that was the invitation for me to say, maybe I want to become a counselor. And so I went on, I got my master's from George Washington University in DC. Loved the experience. And after I got my degree, I just wanted to work. It was not even on my radar to think about going for a doctorate, right? I didn't know anybody in my life personally who had a doctorate. It just was not something I thought about. So I just wanted to get a job. I started working with foster care families in DC. And what I found was there was a huge gap between all this knowledge that I had gotten and what these people needed. It was not, what I got in the books was not transferring well to the services that they needed. And so I knew I needed more. And for the first time, I thought, well, maybe I saw a lot of my colleagues that were applying these doctoral programs. And I'm like, well, if they can do it, maybe I can. And so it took a lot for me to move past self-doubt. Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? Can I really do this? It took a lot for me to finally, lean in and apply. And so I did. I went on and got my degree. I feel like when I started the doctoral program, I was coming at the perspective of, please let them accept me. I hope I'm good enough for them. I hope I'm good enough for them. Never once thinking, I hope the program is good enough for me. I didn't have that mindset at the time. But once I got into graduate school and really started to connect to mentors who would say, Tamika, I see something here, and really started to help me connect to my power, I feel like I left the program in a really different space. And I went on, which is how Vanessa and I connected. I did my internship and postdoc at UC Davis. That was 12 years ago. So I've been here ever since. When I started in the field, I thought that I would continue in college counseling. That was where I loved the work there. I loved working with the population of young people who were forming their identity, separating from families of origin, really coming into awareness of who am I and what do I want? And helping people at that crossroads gave me a lot of fulfillment. I like that working at a college allowed me to work collaboratively with a lot of different departments. I was able to do a lot of outreach. But after about 3 years, I found myself pregnant, and I knew that I really wanted to give more of myself to that role. I didn't want to feel like work was a competition. So I wanted to take some time, at least a year, to be able to just slow down or reduce the impact of work so that I could really show up and find myself as a mom. And so for the first time, I considered going into private practice. And once again, I had to battle those same self-doubt demons, right? That would come up like, can you really do this? Are people really going to come? Is your paycheck going to be steady? I didn't know the first thing about running my own business. But once again, I started looking around and I saw other people who were doing it. And so I said, why not me? Let me just take this shot, right? I was very prayerful about it. And when I went into private practice, I thought it would just be for a couple years, just some time to, like I said, ease into motherhood, have that flexibility. And then I wanted to go back to a more organized job, working for a college. But I found such a love in private practice. What I found was that I was able to be me fully. When I worked at the college, we were starting to move to more of a medical model where it was, okay, get students in, you've got 5 sessions, do your best and move them out. And I thought, I didn't get into this work to just push people through a revolving door. I got into this work so that they could really take the time that they need. Therapy is a process. So 5 sessions was not allowing me to do any sort of meaningful work. And I found that private practice afforded me to take more time, for me to use a lot more creativity in my work, not just the manualized treatments that you oftentimes are required to do when you're working for agencies that are more concerned with numbers instead of people. And so I really found that a home for myself in private practice. So in addition to my private practice, seeing one-on-one clients, I also do workshops. I recently founded an organization called For Love, which is a wellness-based program. It stands for Cultivating Our Real Essence. And it's specifically targeting Black women, really promoting radical self-love and how to live authentically. So I feel like where I've landed is a place that I just feel like I'm able to unapologetically be me in how I show up with my clients, in the healing modalities that I use. That's how I got here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We appreciate it. You know, one thing that I kind of noted, which to me is really important, is representation in the field, Dr. Jackson. And you kind of mentioned this idea of, and I think it happens to everyone, of whether I'm good enough for the program, whether I'm even going to make it in the next level. I think that's one of the things that's keeping a lot of people of color from, essentially taking that big step into transitioning into these professional roles, either PhDs or graduate degrees such as masters that can really help these people with cultural backgrounds and rich in experiences to help other community members move forward and heal. What's one piece of advice you can share with our listening community who might perhaps be doubting themselves? Because you did say, I didn't ask myself whether the program was good enough for me. And I think that's very impactful. That's a different kind of mindset. I mean, I think that takes a lot of mental strength to kind of see it differently. What led you through that process, and how do you think we can adopt that kind of mentality?
So I think it's a great question. And I think it's something that I don't think there's anybody, honestly, that hasn't asked themselves at one point or another, am I enough? Am I good enough? Regardless of race and ethnicity. But when we throw that on the mix, it makes it even more challenging, right? So I think number one is to normalize the question that we all struggle with that. Even the people that you see that are up at the top, that are killing the game, right? I remember I had this one supervisor and I really, really looked up to her. She was so clinically astute and I thought, I want to be like her. That's the kind of counselor I want to be. And I asked her, when do these thoughts go away? The am I good enough? The nervousness before I sit with the client, when is it going to go away? And she said, it's still there for me. And to hear her say that, right? Someone I had pedestaled, it just gave me like a relief of just, oh, okay. All right. So I can't take that as a sign that I don't need to push forward. I need to know that this is part of just the process of being human, right? And I have to keep moving on in spite of it. And what I will say is, while I still have those struggles around the self-doubt piece, it does not grip me in the same way, right? Before, it would literally just mute me. I would just lose my voice completely. And now I feel the fear, I feel the doubt, but I push through anyway. And so I think part of it is really empowering people to know that if there's something, if you're feeling a nudge, right? If that nudge is to do something, to make some kind of contribution to the world, to me, that nudge is God, right? That is not just coming from outside. There's so slow down, listen to it, make space to interrogate. What is this nudge? What is it telling me? Right? And that's where I think being in therapy can be so helpful, because you get to go into a quiet space. You have to face yourself fully, right? And you get a chance to understand, okay, this nudge, if this nudge is here, that means that like I have what it takes within me to be able to fulfill this desire. If I'm sensing it, I have what it takes. I may not know how I'm going to get there, but I have to first believe that if the nudge is there, right? If God gave me this nudge, he also gave me the tools that I need to be able to actualize on this. So I think that piece is really important. I also think, outside of having a therapist, finding a mentor, and that can be challenging as well, because folks are busy and not everybody will have the time to sit down with you. But sometimes a mentor doesn't have to be a long-term relationship, right? Sometimes it just means, hey, take a survey and see who's out there doing the work that you want to do, whose work is really moving you. Send that person a message, right? I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing. Would you be open to just 30 minutes for me just to hear your story, right? Just to hear your story. And it doesn't mean that, and that may turn into a relationship that goes beyond just those 30 minutes, but even those 30 minutes can be really impactful because you'll start to hear portions of your story reflected in other people. You know, when I just was thinking about going into private practice, someone said, if you're having doubt, just schedule coffee dates with people and ask them to tell you their story. And the more I had these dates and these encounters with people, the more I was hearing they were just as afraid as me, right? And here are some things that helped them to move through it. And I was able to use that. And some of these people are folks I never saw again, but I will always remember those 30 minutes or a nugget that they offered to me in that time. So I think it's important to seek out mentorship, to, like I said, interrogate the nudge, and to know that you are enough. Even if you don't know it on a cellular level at your bones yet, use affirmations, right? What is it that I want to know? Maybe I don't feel it completely yet, but use affirmations, right? Growing up, my dad would have us, my brother and I, say an affirmation every morning. And we hated it as kids, right? We just wanted to get out the house. But every morning we had to say, I am somebody. I am Black and I am proud of who I am. I'm a descendant of the great West African kingdom. I am a child of God. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Every morning from the time I was 5, probably through middle school, before I left the house, I had to recite that. And I was able to say it so fast just so I could get out the house. And he would say, no, slow down, say it again. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but looking back now, I recognized what it was that he was trying to do. He knew the world that I was going to enter into. He knew that no matter what I had on my side, there was going to be so much working against me. And so for him to be able to just be so mindful and intentional with helping me from that early age to begin to affirm myself, right? It is a practice that I continue to do, even when like I said, even if I don't completely believe it, if I say it enough, it begins to feed my spirit and begins to take root.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Jackson. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
One thing I gotta ask is you've mentioned these terms such as, spirit, God, prayer. I think there's a chance of folks being kind of surprised that a therapist is talking about spirituality and bringing that component in. And I know in our sessions one-on-one, you've brought that component in. You've said the space is a sacred space, and you ask me like, what is spirit telling you? And so for me, I really appreciate that about our sessions, that it's not just this typical Western modality of this theory and this therapy and that. There's a spiritual component. And so this is the Pursuing Ancestral Medicine podcast, the OFM. So I'm wondering, in your work and in the encounters you've had, how important, or how does that play, that spiritual component? How do you bring that in so that someone can explore that about themselves, so that that space is sacred?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, Vanessa. And, for most people, even if people are not religious, I think most people would identify with some component of spirituality, right? Whether that be a belief in a higher power, whether that be a reverence for nature, most people have some, and they may not call it, spirituality, but there's some openness, right? And oftentimes in psychology graduate programs, this is a component that's not addressed. And I feel like for so many people, that is, for so many people, moving through their relationship with God or moving through spirituality is one of the first places that they turn when trying to understand, trying to navigate challenges. And when we just exclude that, to me, I feel like we're missing so much of that person. So I'm very transparent in talking about my belief in God. I don't go into a lot of details in terms of religious affiliation so much, but just this idea that, yes, I do believe in a power greater than me, I do believe, I do seek out God, even in my work with my clients. There are some times where I'm saying, okay, God, give me the words for this moment, right? And I'm trusting that God is sort of using me as a vessel and moving through me. So when you go to my website, you will see little terms, little clues about my worldview. And I think it's important. Again, this is why fit is so important. There may be some people that just doesn't fly with, and that's okay. But I want to be clear. I want to be able to be authentically me in the room. And that means being able to have discussions around spirituality. Now, I also will take my time in getting to know this person. I'm not going to make any assumption or just, put something on somebody, a belief that they may not hold. So in the beginning, when I'm getting to know a client across their multiple identities, I'll ask them, like, what does spirituality mean to you? Do you have any spiritual practices? How does your relationship to spirituality impact, you're moving through or navigating challenging situations, right? So I really want to understand from the client's perspective what helps them, what their relationship with spirituality is, and then bring that into the room as it feels congruent, right, to their values and their belief system.
I'm looking at Sai. Oh, we lost him. We just lost Sai. He's using an iPad. His Mac is acting up. So
okay.
I don't even know how we're still on because he's the one hosting, but we'll continue. That's
okay.
What we do. That's what we do. I know there was a memory that I have of us at UC Davis when we were in the presence of someone completely wonderful and great, Ntozake Shange. And I remember you going around collecting questions because there was this and I really liked this, where people could anonymously ask questions on a piece of paper, and that they would be read to her and she would answer them. And one question I submitted was, I haven't seen beauty in 2 years, and what can I do to see beauty again? And her response was, beauty is still there even when we're blinded to it, waiting for us to see. And I remember you being there in that room in that moment. And I always feel like there's no coincidences, that there is this path that each of us are on, and sometimes our paths cross or are parallel. I'm wondering for you, when you experience a moment like that, for me that was my moment with her. When you experience a moment like that with maybe in the room with a patient, with a client, or in your everyday life, what is that moment telling you? How does that inform your everyday living when you have moments like that where you just know it's a wink from God?
I love that. And thank you for even just bringing that memory of us being in the presence of Ntozake Shange together. That was a real gift. So thank you for just the memory. When I have those moments, the God winks, as you say, or just those knowing moments that this was greater than me, this was greater than you, I try to pause and, number one, just note it for what it is. Just acknowledging, like, God, I see you, and thank you, right? And oftentimes, depending on who I'm with, I will say it aloud, right? Like, wow, did you feel that, or did you notice that? Or I think there's a power in not just holding it, but sharing. It to me, it amplifies the significance of the moment. And I think the more we are open to that, the more time we take to slow down, the more we experience those moments, because I think they happen all the time. But I think oftentimes we can just be so busy or just caught up in day-to-day living that are in such a rush that we miss it. And my prayer is continually for God to just open up my awareness to recognize it more and more.
So one thing that you mentioned that I want to touch on too is you said you are a descendant of West African. And so one thing that we like to talk about in our podcast is our ancestors. We want to acknowledge them. And for some folks, people are just finding out, that like we have, like they're called like the lost children, because with the our tribe, the Yaqui tribe, we were so spread out. There was genocide, there was massacre, there was enslavement, there was all these things. So everyone's so spread out that some people find out much later in life, like, oh wow, I'm Yoeme, I'm Yaqui. and they want to reach back to the ancestors, or they find out that there's something in their family that they didn't know before, and they're like, wow, I really wish I knew that great 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 grandpa or grandma, because they sound like they would be so helpful for me now. So one thing I like to say is that I'm all the faces of my family, and that includes my ancestors, that I carry my ancestors with me. And so for someone who is just now coming into their understanding of their ancestors, how would you help them, or help them in their exploration and commitment to reaching back? Because I think that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to reach back before all the things that had happened that had brought in this generational trauma. We're trying to reach back to bring in the generational growth. Where can we find that generational growth? Through our ancestors.
I love that question. And having ancestral ties is something that has become really important to me. Both of my parents were Black history teachers. And so I got a lot of the knowledge and education growing up, but I didn't always see the value, right? And I didn't always have my own level of curiosity about who am I and where do I come from? And because I am African American, there's this huge cutoff, right? I don't know exactly where my people come from, right? I can deduce that it's around this region, but we're very much cut off. So there is this sense of loss that I carry in not knowing, like, who would I be, right, had this slave trade not happened? What would some of the traditions that we might have? One of the things, though, that I'm finding is that there's so much that has been passed down. So when I think about just African American culture, and I think about some of the ways that these people who were enslaved practiced religion, a lot of times they were still weaving in, right, elements of practices from their native countries in Africa. And so I've been able to do some research, some study on that, and knowing that a lot of what I experience in Black church has ties back, right? And so that's helped me to appreciate and help me to feel a little bit of the closing of that gap, recognizing that there'll always be some hole. But one of the things for me is I recognize I don't have to necessarily know 5 generations ago. I can start right now, right? With who's still here, who's still in the room, right? Let me have some conversations with my mom. What do you remember about growing up? What are some of the messages that you got from your grandmother? What did your grandmother tell you that she got from her mom? And so I find myself now a lot more curious to know the stories, right? How did people see themselves? What were the things that you struggled with? And I find that there's a lot of value, both for me in learning it, but also for the family members to be able to do the sharing. Because oftentimes there was a culture of silence, right? We don't talk about our struggles, we just keep it in. And so when I start to give them space to talk about things, there's a freeing, a healing that happens. It's a bi-directional healing. So my advice would be to start talking to the people that are still around, record those conversations, right? And also to remember something I saw recently talked about how we are all ancestors in training, right? So as an ancestor in training, what is the message that I want to be able to give to not just my daughter, but any young person, right? That to know that I have the power right now to be able to share some of the things that were kept from being shared because there was so much fear at earlier points in my family life. You know, growing up, I grew up in a very Christian household, Baptist, and I think there was a lot of perception that when we talk about, you know, calling in the ancestors, that was something that was like bad, right? That you don't call up spirits, you just pray to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And so I think that as I've evolved, I think it's really important I found that it's all God, right? It's all God. As I'm calling in my ancestors, as I'm praying to the Holy Spirit, to me, that is God using multiple channels. And so I think it's giving people permission to know that even if you have been raised one way, that there is room to expand your thinking around spirituality and the meaning connected to ancestral connection, ancestral honoring.
For me, I'm on Plains Miwok land, and Cesar, he's in Kumeyaay land. And so you're like in the pocket, right? Or
I'm in Elk Grove.
You're in Elk Grove. Okay, so that's Plains Miwok land. So we're both from, okay, we're on that. So by doing that land acknowledgement, even though we forgot to do it, we want to appreciate everyone that's present with us in this moment. And that includes the original stewards of this land that we're on. Even though this is through Zoom, it's still really important to remember that we are all connected in some way. We're all connected and we're all here wanting to support each other. And so for folks that are interested in maybe getting in touch with you, if they're in the Sacramento area or because of Zoom, they might want to reach out. What's the best way for them to get in contact with you and learn more about you and what you do if they're curious?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for the land acknowledgement. I just appreciate the power of remembering and honoring that we're not here alone.
Yeah.
There's something just so powerfully comforting about that. So thank you for that. If folks want to get in touch with me, my website, drtamikajackson.com, is one of the ways that I'll give you the widest understanding of who I am and the work that I do. I also have a page on Instagram under _love. And although Core Love is creating programs that target Black women, I feel like the content on the site is beneficial to anyone regardless of race, ethnicity, gender. So that would be another way to find me and connect with me. And then, of course, my email, which is drtamikajackson@gmail.com.
So, Sai, I know we got you cut off a little bit. You missed some of the discussion. We were just talking about ancestors, and I don't know if you were able to hear on your end. No, you weren't. Okay, you weren't able to hear. But we still have a few minutes. We have about 10 minutes. So I was wondering, Sai, was there anything that you'd like to ask, or because I don't want it to just be me talking the whole time. So we got a co-host. Where's my co-host? You know.
I lost both of you. I apologize for a second. I was outside and the sun was hitting on my screen and just shut it down.
It shut it down. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm glad it didn't end the whole, like that was my fear. I'm like, hopefully, since it was hosting through my link, I was thinking hopefully it didn't shut the whole thing down. But it didn't. So
it kept going.
It kept going. That's
good.
Wonderful.
So I just want to thank Dr. Jackson first and foremost from the interactions I've had with Vanessa. She always speaks very highly of you, Dr. Jackson, and that's very comforting, to hear because, and specifically my interactions that I've had previously with therapists, counselors, psychologists, and interactions I've had through the experiences of other friends. It's very rarely that someone speaks good of their therapist. It's usually someone like, yeah, I'm moving from this therapist onto this other one, or from this counselor onto this other one. And for one person to speak so highly of a counselor and recommend it so much, I'm like, her work must be really impactful. So, I want to thank you for what you're doing. And then for taking the time and, speaking to our audience, speaking to us today from the short bit that I've been present in the meeting. I've gotten to take a lot for my own personal gain, and I know the audience is going to as well. I wanted to ask one question, and it kind of goes back to, before I end up getting cut. We were talking about, ancestral medicine, and for someone undergoing a situation, Dr. Jackson, in which one of the ways that I like to think about it is when we're undergoing certain mental situations, certain experiences that we're experiencing through our lifetime, there is an immediate need for us to move towards the process of healing in order to survive, because sometimes there's no other way around it. What would you recommend for people who are perhaps undergoing this ideology of a loss perceived of purpose or loss perceived of motivation? What do you recommend are things that this person should reconsider when they're going through these situations?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the question. And, one, I think that's a place that all of us can find ourselves at one time or another, right? Varying levels of intensity, but we can all find ourselves at that moment where we lose our hope, right? Where we question, is it worth it? Or do I have what it takes to keep going? Or why am I even here? And feeling a lack of value. So I think it's important for people to know that that's normal to find yourself in that place, and that it's a temporary place. I think a lot of times that place can feel so overwhelming, and it just feels like I'm just trapped, right? So for me, it's letting people know, I know that this feels all encompassing. I know it feels so dark, but I also know that this too shall pass, that you are going to get through it. And so one of the things that I try to help people with is not just looking for light at the end of the tunnel, because sometimes it's going to be a long tunnel, right? Depending on whatever the chart is that you are trying to navigate. But can we begin to find the light within the tunnel, right? It makes me think earlier, Vanessa, when you were talking about Ntozake Shange and how she said, beauty is always there. It's just waiting for you to recognize it again. So the light to me is always there. And so I will help that person to connect to just a moment, just a flicker of joy, right? It could just be the fact that the sun felt good on my skin when I was outside today. Or it could be, just see what it's like to just find a tree that just calls to you and just sit with that tree. I tell people sometimes sit with the tree at your back and just literally feel the symbolism of something is still holding me up, right? And I tell people, if you're still here, that means you're still here for a purpose, right? And even if you can't see it right now, that doesn't diminish that purpose in any way. So I try to help people to find evidence of light, right? Who is somebody that's really meaningful in your life, whether they're still here or whether they've passed. Getting them to begin to talk about that person, right, begins to open up that channel of light. And then from there, I would encourage them to find a space where they could talk to somebody on a regular basis. Sometimes it's helpful to talk to a trusted friend, talk to a family member, but sometimes you feel like, I don't want to burden that person, or I feel like I keep saying the same thing over and over. And I think that's the benefit of going to counseling, is that this is your space where you don't have to worry about how this is burdening your therapist. This is your space to just show up. Your therapist has his or her own space, right? But this is your space. That's important. And then I think, now we have the blessing of so many powerful podcasts, right? That to me serve as a gap filler, right? It serves as, it's not necessarily a substitute for when you may need more therapy, but it becomes another way of feeding your soul, right? So the work that you all are doing with YoFM, another podcast that I recommend is Homecoming by Dr. Tana Bryant Davis. She's a Black psychologist, minister, and it's all about helping people to come back home to themselves, to find their way again. And so just as we talk about the importance of the food that we take in and having important physical nourishment to our body, it's also important to nourish our mind, our spirit, right? So I tell people every day, listen to something for 20 to 30 minutes a day that you know is going to feed you, right? That might be music, that might be a podcast. I tell people to move. Sometimes, when you're feeling depressed, it can be really hard to find motivation to move. But I encourage people, even if it's just a stretch, right? Like depression, trauma gets lodged in our bodies at a cellular level. And so it's not enough sometimes to just talk about it, but move in the service of your healing, right? Get outside, take a walk, knowing that that's all helping you to move through. So those are some of the things I would recommend when people begin to lose their way. One more thing I would add is sometimes we find ourselves here again. We've been here before. And so sometimes I will invite them to remember, you were here before. I remember 3 years ago, you were here, right? What was it that helped to pull you through? Because obviously you were able to transcend that moment, right? And that helps to build hope that I can do it again.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's hope. There is hope. It is there. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. And I just want to say, since I know you were saying how Vanessa would speak highly of me, but I just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that light recognizes light, and Vanessa's light was so evident from the very first time that I encountered her spirit. Like we were in a room of, I don't know, maybe 100 to 150 people at a retreat. And she just opened her mouth, and my spirit just felt so drawn to her light, to her positivity. You just know. My dad would say, there's some things that you don't know how you know that you know, but you know. And I just knew that was a really special spirit. So all these years later, Vanessa, to still be connected to you is such a blessing. I think oftentimes people acknowledge how much the counselor is helpful to the client, but you don't always get to hear your impact on the counselor. And I just, I know I said it to you before, but every opportunity I can get to say it again and again, I just want you to know that you have been such a source of light and inspiration on my path. And I thank you for that sincerely.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and I just want to say, Jokoe Tesia, thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, for all these years and for participating today. We may not be of the same tribe, but you are definitely a relative of ours. So always family, and you're always welcome on the show. And I can't wait for our next session to debrief and just catch up. So thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. Much love. Be safe. Be well.